You're watching the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. On today's programme, Boris Johnson and Joe Biden meet ahead of the G7 summit tomorrow, with climate change a key part of the agenda. After a washout May, some areas could see a heatwave this weekend. We find out if climate change is to blame for our weather getting stuck. And the carbon footprint of a Cornish pasty is revealed. Hello and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show, where we track the changes happening to our world right now and meet those developing the solutions. Well, as world leaders from the G7 countries prepare to meet this weekend in Cornwall, it's expected that the climate crisis will be a key area of discussion. And ahead of the official summit, which begins tomorrow, Boris Johnson and the US President Joe Biden have held talks on key issues, including the environment. Well, in a moment, we'll hear from Mary Robinson, Chair of the Elders, on what might be achieved at this weekend's meeting. But first, Sky's Dan Whitehead has the latest.
There is no doubt that climate change is right at the top of the agenda here at the G7 summit. The US President Joe Biden and UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson holding those early bilateral meetings today to try and really set the agenda over the weekend, that all 7 leaders can come to some agreements when it comes to the challenges that climate change presents. And there will be pressure from no less than 40 groups who are holding events right across Cornwall, the likes of Ocean Rebellion, Extinction Rebellion, who want to let the leaders know about the challenges that the world is facing from oil, from climate change, sea level rises. I mean, simply driving in here to St Ives this afternoon, there are at least half a dozen or so bridges over the main roads with Extinction Rebellion banners and protesters waving at every TV crew. So they want that message to get out there, and they'll be making their voices heard. And of course, what better backdrop for the leaders and for the protesters to get their message across here in Cornwall. Of course, a marine county, so much marine history here, and of course they are impacted on a daily basis by some of the challenges that climate change presents. So we will see those protests over the weekend, and undoubtedly climate change itself will be right at the top of the agenda for the G7 leaders.
Well, one person who knows the inner workings of these high-level talks better than most is Mary Robinson. The former President of Ireland is now chair of the Elders, the international organisation of global leaders. I spoke to her earlier, and I started by asking what she thought about the cuts to the UK's foreign aid budget.
To put into legislation 0.7% was real leadership. And frankly, it's never been needed more. This is the wrong time and the wrong way, especially when you have presidency of the COP. We need to build trust with developing countries. The $100 billion a year of climate finance, half of it going to adaptation, has been long promised, and we still haven't got there. And meanwhile, developing countries are seeing the huge solidarity packages that the richer parts of the world, understandably want for their citizens and are able to do for their citizens. But, the contrast between not able to reach the 100 billion, it's becoming an angry point. And when, the presidency of COP has decided in this year of all years to reduce what was leadership, and that means cutting budgets in Yemen, cutting budgets in Sudan, cutting budgets in Syria. It's shocking. The presidency of the COP has to have the trust of developing countries if we're going to have a successful COP. That's just the absolutely prerequisite.
What you're touching on there is that it needs to go deeper, doesn't it, than a sort of cheerful communique at the end of the G7. There needs to be a lot of detail. What detail specifically would you like to see?
I want to see the G7 commit to every country this year in Glasgow having a nationally determined contribution which is real, worked out, measurable, and about being aligned to the 1.5 degrees. So yes, it's good to have the long-term goal of being zero carbon and zero emissions by 2050, but we're more interested in what's going to happen in 2025, 2024, 2026. Measurable, just as the vaccines has to be measurable, which is why the elders really support the Gavi COVAX commitment that was made for $1 billion by the 1st of September and $2 billion by mid-2022. Not saying in a global way, we will vaccinate the whole world. That's kind of rhetoric. We need precision.
Well, you can see more of my interview with Mary Robinson on our YouTube channel. You just head to youtube.com/Sky News. Well, we can take a look now at some of the day's other climate news. And the Prince of Wales has hosted a meeting with CEOs from some of the world's leading companies ahead of a meeting with G7 leaders. He was joined by the US climate envoy John Kerry and Alok Sharma, the president of COP26. Well, tomorrow the chief executives will meet the G7 leaders, the first such meeting between government and global business leaders to discuss the acceleration of sustainable investment. And the first collaboration between the biodiversity and climate bodies of the UN has said that narrowly focused actions to combat climate change can harm nature and vice versa. They say any measures that focus too narrowly on combating climate change should be evaluated in terms of their overall benefits and risks. For example, generating renewable energy can cause surges of mining activity or use large areas of land. The seabed off the coast of Sussex is going to be leased from the Queen as part of plans to create a marine park. The water was previously home to a vast historic kelp forest and was a haven for marine life, but 90% of it has been lost over recent decades. There are also plans to expand the park along the entire coastline of East and West Sussex. And the coral reef ecosystems could dissolve faster than they grow by 2050. That's according to a new study. Reefs have to regenerate and grow to survive, depositing calcium carbonate to make new structures, a process called calcification. Calcification rates have declined by about 4% a year since the 70s. Researchers believe the drop is partly due to ocean warming and coral bleaching. And a cave painting thought to be the oldest in the world is rapidly peeling off due to climate change. The 44,000-year-old artwork on Indonesia's island of Sulawesi is being exfoliated off due to increasing salt erosion in the cave. Scientists say that warming temperatures alongside prolonged drought combined with heavy monsoonal rainfall has created conditions intensifying the salt crystallization. Now, temperatures across the UK have been steadily rising this week. Some areas could even experience a heat wave this weekend. But the warmer weather that we've been experiencing is rather different, isn't it, to last month, which was dominated by low-pressure, heavy downpours and prolonged spells of rain. So what is going on with our weather? Well, here to explain more is Kirsty McCabe from the Royal Meteorological Society, also Sky's weather presenter. Afternoon to you, Kirsty. Just explain, why is our weather getting stuck and has it got anything to do with climate change?
Hello there, Sam. Lots to talk about when it comes to the weather and weather patterns. And it does seem like maybe we have been stuck in something of a cool, wet May and then quite a nice, warm June. And it is all to do with the jet stream. Now, the jet stream is this fast-moving ribbon of air that's high up in our atmosphere and it steers low-pressure systems around on the ground. And it's all to do with the temperature difference between the poles and the equator. And when there's a large temperature contrast, like we get in the winter, then that means a stronger jet stream and we see low-pressure systems move across the UK. In summer, the contrast is weaker and that allows the jet stream to move further north and we get more settled weather. So in May there, the jet stream is a little bit further south and that's why we got all that wet weather. When it comes to the links with climate change, it's a little bit inconclusive at the moment. Some school of thought is that the jet stream will weaken because there's not so much of a temperature difference. If the Arctic is warming and it is warming much more quickly than the rest of the globe, then due to something called the Arctic amplification, then that will reduce the temperature contrast. The jet stream won't be as strong. However, there is also an argument that with warmer world, a warmer globe, we're going to see tropical storms moving a little bit further north into northern latitudes and they will interact and strengthen the jet stream. So at the moment, we can't really pin it down to climate change. But when it comes to heat waves, we can. Now, heat waves are pretty much likely to be linked to climate change. We're going to see more intense and more frequent heat waves with just a small increase in global temperature. It has a big impact.
Good to see you in your glorious garden there. Thank you, Kirsty.
Thank you.
Now, with the leaders of the world's 7 richest countries meeting in Cornwall tomorrow to discuss the defining issues of our time, there is one question that remains unanswered, and that is, what is the carbon footprint of a Cornish pasty? Well, luckily for us, a team at the University of Exeter have been doing the sums, and Professor Stefan Boehm joins me now to fill us in on their findings. Professor Boehm, good to talk to you. Why are some of the country's finest minds turning their attention to the humble Cornish pasty?
Well, it's a very popular product. 120 million of these are produced each year here in Cornwall. And I'm talking to you from Cornwall, from the Penryn campus. And we've teamed up with pasty makers to, first of all, assess what is actually the carbon footprint of each pasty. And we found about 1.5 to 2 kilos per pasty, which actually is not too bad if you compare to other full meals like a roast dinner or a lasagna. So it's not a bad carbon footprint, but of course it can still be lowered, particularly if you're thinking about 120 million times these. It's significant.
So what are the main drivers of that carbon footprint?
Well, if you open up a pasty, I bought this early on our campus shop. So you have about a whole range of ingredients, but a typical Cornish pasty has meat in there, beef, a range of vegetables, and of course the pastry is made from wheat. All of that has a carbon footprint. So we've used something called life cycle analysis to estimate what the carbon footprint is of all of these ingredients. And of course, meat is the biggest contributor here. Beef has quite a large carbon footprint. So if you take away the meat, or you source the meat differently, you rear it in different ways, you have organic, better aquaculture, then you can lower the carbon footprint quite significantly. So we developed a tool that allows pasty makers to assess that carbon footprint and alter the ingredients, change the composition of a pasty to lower the carbon footprint.
Well, I'm sure the world is definitely a better place for it. Professor Stefan Boehm, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Well, that is everything from us for today. But coming up tomorrow, we've got a special extended programme live from Cornwall as that G7 summit gets underway. Well, you can see that here on Sky News at 6:30 tomorrow evening. Hope to see you then.